effective human settlement programs. We join with all countries in seeking to define an established plan of action to achieve these ends. We propose to continue our efforts in seeking national solutions to the problems of human settlement. We are convinced, however, that national efforts would not be sufficient in the process of solutions are to be accelerated and given the urgency it requires. International assistance, international cooperation, and international resources are also necessary and essential. As a developing country, we are keenly aware of the invaluable role that international cooperation and assistance can play in accelerating the process of growth and development. For this reason, one of the major outcomes which Trinidad and Tobago expects from this conference is the mobilization of large-scale and effective international financial and technical assistance for countries like ours in their human settlement development and the establishment of suitable institutional arrangements for the implementation of this assistance. We therefore intend to work towards strengthening, restructuring, and rationalizing where appropriate international institutions which will best meet our expectations for international cooperation and assistance in this field. We would like to work in cooperation with all delegates towards a generally agreed and acceptable range of principles, policies, and strategies whose implementation will stimulate, promote, and accelerate the integrative process of development with human settlement as its unifying element. I thank you, Mr. President. I now ask for the capsule.
The independent country of Trinidad and Tobago, former British colonies and now a member of the British Commonwealth of Nations, is situated in the southern Caribbean, 7 miles away from the Venezuelan mainland. Its population, over 1 million. All but 40,000 live in Trinidad. Perhaps one of the most cosmopolitan societies with almost every ethnic group and blend represented, producing a creative and exuberant people. Total land area, 2,000 square miles, some 1,200,000 acres. Half of this remaining untapped in virgin rainforests, swamp and marginal lands, a rich reserve and heritage for future generations. The main natural resource is oil, found in the southern half of the country. Asphalt from the country's natural pitch lake has helped to surface the roads of the world. The sugar industry employs 4.5 times the labor of the petroleum industry, giving rise to a proliferation of rural settlements. The capital city of Port of Spain, as in most primate cities, displays the usual extremes of wealth and poverty. Openness and dualism in the economy have produced widely differing standards in human settlement. Worse still, dual standards exist within the same settlement. A more equitable distribution of adequate housing has been the goal of human settlements developed by government as well as by private enterprise. The concept of partnership brings government, industry, and community together in providing homes for low-income workers. 3 housing aid programs show how this is done. Within the oil belt, Textrin's housing aid plan has helped nearly 2,000 employees to own their own homes. A housing loan scheme specifically conceived to assist the lower wage earner in the sugar industry is changing the face of rural communities. For people without much resources, the 3rd housing aid program, now being reintroduced by the National Housing Authority, has mobilized communities to build their own homes. These 3 housing aid programs, with their positive results, are treated in more detail in our 25-minute audiovisual presentation, Partnerships in Housing.
I thank the High Commissioner for Trinidad and Tobago to Canada. I must say, as I see the various capsules, I want to visit each of your countries, and those I haven't visited, to visit again. The difficulty with that would be that I'd be away so long that my Prime Minister would find out he could get along without me. In light of the decision taken by the conference at its 6th plenary meeting under Rule 55 of the Rules of Procedure, I now give the floor to the representative of the International Cooperative Alliance, Mr. Wallace J. Campbell.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I feel as you do that the capsules have told a story that is very exciting and important to this conference. Earlier, as I prepared this speech, I said that after 10 days of speeches that have outlined the degradation of our cities and the greater deterioration of the living conditions in rural areas, it may seem foolhardy to strike a note of optimism. Several of your countries have struck that note. But today I want to bring you our own message of hope and success and opportunity. As you know, I have the honor to represent the worldwide organization of cooperative associations, the International Cooperative Alliance, both in New York at the United Nations and at Habitat. The ICA is the largest and oldest of the non-governmental organizations with consultative status at the United Nations. It was founded in 1895, and has operated continuously for the last 80 years. It has dues-paying organizations in 64 of your countries and has more than 320 million members affiliated with these organizations. It's larger in terms of membership than the United States, the USSR, or most of the other governments in the world. These are families that are helping themselves by helping each other. They include agricultural marketing and purchasing cooperatives, credit cooperatives, rural electric cooperatives, fishermen's cooperatives, consumer insurance, banking, and housing cooperatives. The housing cooperatives have already built more than 8 million dwellings, providing homes for about 32 million persons in 27 national organizations around the world. Our cooperatives have long been active creating human settlements. In each community, the people create community facilities for recreation, for social services, for economic services, and for community development. Cooperatives strive for the maximum participation of the people in the planning, management, financing, operation of these communities. This is the message of hope and the story of success. Ahead of us lies great opportunity. Habitat is a solution-oriented conference. This is one of those solutions. One solution with demonstrated success. It is also an engine of development for the creation of prosperity in the larger communities in which we operate. The Housing Committee of the International Cooperative Alliance, the parent organization of the International Cooperative Housing Development Association, is the body to which we turn for policy and guidance. The cooperative housing organizations in many of the developed countries are members of ICHTA, which is seeking to reach out into the less developed countries to help the people in those countries to help themselves to better housing. ICHTA has a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations, which indicates to the members of the UN that ICHTA is a known and respected organization with which they may work. A similar memorandum has been signed between the Economic Commission for Africa and ICHTA, a full-time specialist on cooperative housing is assigned to the ECA to work with member governments in Africa interested in initiating cooperative housing programs. The government of Finland has provided the funds to pay for the services of one of the architects of KK, the National Finnish Cooperative Housing Organization. ICHTA has assisted the government of Tanzania and, with help from UNDP, has completed a self-help sites and services project just on the outskirts of Dar es Salaam. Currently, an expert from ICHTA is assisting in the construction of a low-cost mutual help housing demonstration project in Maseru in Lesotho. The UN Capital Development Fund and the UNDP are providing the capital resources for the project. In Bangladesh, the International Relief and Development Organization, CARE, in cooperation with AID and ICHTA, completed 7,500 rural housing units as part of a demonstration project in the Delta region of that country. ICHTA has also worked with the UN Center for Housing, Building and Planning, the ILO, the UN Environment Program, and UNIDO in areas of slum and squatter settlements and shelter-related studies. An important new resource for human settlements may well be the Food for Work program of the World Food Program in Rome. Even more important in economic impact are the bilateral programs undertaken by ICHTA members with the support of their respective governments, particularly the United States, the Federal Republic of Germany, Sweden, and Finland. In the less developed countries, the cooperative shelter programs may take the forms of sites and services, projects, aided self-help, core housing, roof and foundation schemes, and other patterns. In all cases, efforts are made to assist in creating an indigenous organization capable of continuing the process of developing and providing lower income groups with access to better shelter. The International Cooperative Alliance feels that housing and human settlements are dynamic elements of the development process. They create jobs, they mobilize savings, they create new markets for home furnishings, they become an engine of economic development in the best sense. They are an opportunity for economic growth and expansion. Most human settlements for the poor of the world will have to be built by the poor. They can do that job better, however, with technical assistance and seed capital. They can create communities not now possible if greater resources are available. To maximize their effectiveness, it is important to create a partnership between the non-governmental organizations, in this case the cooperatives, and the governments. In a recent meeting in Sofia, the International Cooperative Alliance adopted unanimously a resolution presented by its Housing Committee calling on the United Nations to make available funds for housing cooperative programs and asking that the bilateral assistance programs that in bilateral assistance programs, the countries with experience in cooperative housing make this experience available and devote a bigger share of their assistance funds for the development of cooperative housing. Finally, the ICA requested the UN to give a high priority to the solution of the housing problem throughout the world, particularly in the light of the recommendations of this Conference on Human Settlements. To that end, it is further requested that the UN set up a special division to handle cooperative housing development in its Human Settlements program. A major emphasis of the Habitat Conference and its Declaration of Principles has been on maximum popular participation. This is the essence of cooperative housing and must be a factor in the new world inspired by Habitat. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the representative of the International Cooperative Alliance, and I now give the floor to the representative of the International Chamber of Commerce, Mr. J.A. Armstrong.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Like many delegates attending this conference, I took part in the historic United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm in 1972. As now, I represented the International Chamber of Commerce, which itself represents business and industry worldwide. Principally, but not exclusively, we speak for the private sector of the economy in the 85 countries of our membership. I recall clearly that in addressing the Stockholm Conference, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce found it necessary to point out that industry had been almost completely forgotten in the course of the debates there. My main purpose in speaking today is to ensure that industry is not overlooked here, especially since an action program is to be agreed upon by this conference towards which industry can make a significant and perhaps irreplaceable contribution. The preparatory committee for this conference drew up a list of needs in relation to human settlements. It thus envisaged the necessity of shelter, of water supply, of sewage and waste disposal systems, of air and water purity, of materials for construction, of sources of energy, of methods of transport for people and materials. It also stressed the need for defense against environmental risks, including noise and noxious industrial products and processes. If we reflect upon this list, we cannot fail to be aware of the significance of industry's role, its decisions on industrial location, its choice of processes, its investments, its technological progress, its management skills. It would be an understatement to say that a world which wished to tackle these problems and rejected the potential contribution of industry would be working with one hand tied behind its back. Nothing that I say today, and nothing that is contained in the written submission of the International Chamber of Commerce distributed to delegations, should be interpreted as indicating that we underestimate the essential role in habitat of politicians, administrators, urban planners, architects, research workers, economists, or citizens groups. On the contrary, what we wish to suggest is that all should work with business and industry, with the private sector, in solving a problem that is so vast and so complex that their concerted efforts cannot be dispensed with. Concertation means, in our view, concerted planning and concerted implementation. Our written statement elaborates on this. There are three special areas of contribution for industry, and these are technology, management, and finance. Each main branch of industry depends for its survival and progress upon the quality of its technical innovation. The industries involved in urban development are no exceptions to this principle. These industries constantly pour their ingenuity, their experience, and their money into research for improved and more economical methods of achieving their objectives. This research is the principal source of new techniques that will have to be developed and spread internationally. The need for the fullest possible international exchange of technical information is generally recognized. Technical assistance provided through governmental or intergovernmental channels will, it should be noted, often need to call upon the expertise of industry. Consultants and advisors should be drawn from both the public and the private sector, and the fullest use should be made of existing international networks of consulting firms, public work constructors, and special subcontractors. This is in the interest of the efficient tackling of the physical problems of habitats. I turn now to the question of management skills. These are to be found at varying levels among the entrepreneurs of countries at all stages of development. In many developing countries, there will often be occasions when the collaboration in major projects of companies from industrialized countries can profitably be sought. Joint ventures with local entrepreneurs may often provide the most efficient solution. They can match the technical expertise of foreign corporations with local knowledge and needs and conditions, thus providing the proper balance for local acceptability and helping to transfer skills for local growth and continuity. The third major role that the private sector can fulfill is in finance. The International Chamber of Commerce recognizes that private finance on normal commercial terms will often not be feasible for major projects in developing countries. Banks and other private sector financial institutions, however, can still find a role in association with governments and intergovernmental agencies if appropriate special arrangements can be devised to allow private sources of capital and their financial expertise to be tapped effectively. All of these considerations and others are developed in our written submission. The essential message that the International Chamber of Commerce wishes to convey can, however, be stated very briefly. Industry is more aware than ever before of its social responsibilities. It is an integral part of modern society. It cannot and does not wish to stand aside from the major changes that the coming years will bring. Those who work in industry have a range of adaptabilities and abilities and of expertise which are available for a concerted effort with other sectors of society to tackle realistically the most difficult problems facing the world. On behalf of industry, therefore, the International Chamber of Commerce offers its cooperation in the action that must follow this conference. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de la Chambre de commerce internationale. Conformément à la décision prise par la conférence à sa 6e séance plénière en application de l'article 55 du règlement intérieur, je donne maintenant la parole au représentant de la Confédération internationale des syndicats libres, M. Nsumra.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving us the opportunity to make a short contribution to your proceedings. For quite a few years, we were all looking forward to this important gathering, and we are very grateful to the Canadian government for taking the initiative at the Stockholm conference. The ICFTU, the world's largest voluntary organization of free working women and men, is especially pleased by Habitat, as we tried as early as 1960, simultaneously with the International Cooperative Alliance, to emphasize the urgent need for more significant United Nations activities in this fundamental field. Consequently, we suggested to the Secretary General and to ECOSOC to establish a specialized agency for housing, building, and planning, which was then and is still now an underdeveloped sector of most societies, both in developing and in developed countries, and which needs strong institutional and financial fundaments. But notwithstanding our appreciation of the fact that this conference proves that the family of nations is beginning to wake up to the urgency of satisfying one of the basic needs of the underprivileged sections in our nations, and of the growing pressure of deteriorating urban and rural settlements, which threaten to become explosive everywhere, we are afraid that most of the fine speeches made here in Vancouver will not be followed by the necessary action. We realize, of course, that in the developing part of the world, the task to be fulfilled is tremendous. Whereas the first industrial revolution in the West was a step-by-step process, starting with a few sectors like coal, iron, and textile, proceeding via the railroads and the telegraph, and so on and so on. The third world had to jump at once into the jet and TV age. The consequence is that human settlements are utterly neglected, especially as in the allocation of resources was left to market forces and transnational enterprises. Foreign assistance programs were based on the assumption that the repetition of the first industrial revolution would bring the solution automatically, forgetting that this would also mean a repetition on an increased scale of the abject living conditions of the great masses of people in the 19th century, which was only mitigated in a number of countries by the permanent struggle of the free labor movement. Such a repetition can no longer be tolerated in the last part of the 20th century, with all the lofty ideals proclaimed in the UN Charter and other covenants of international organizations and national constitutions. But there is more to it. When ICFTU suggested the creation of a special agency for housing, building, and planning, we were convinced that the human settlement industry must become the dynamo of national and international development policies. And we are very happy that Mr. Penalosa, in his recent article, The Need for a New Development Policy, said, I quote, I believe the engine for growth of the future development can be centered in construction and modernization of human settlements, unquote. And that the declaration of the Vancouver Symposium emphasized that human settlements and their environment must become the leaders in getting the economy out of its present stagnation, both in developing and in developed countries. This can only be achieved if, in the framework of the new international economic order, new priorities are established. Shifting the allocation of resources, manpower, and raw materials from a growing production of nonsense products, serving the prestige and profits of the few, and not to the basic needs of food and shelter for the many, especially in the developing countries. Consequently, the UN Habitat Human Settlements Foundation must become a towering Canadian mountain instead of a little mouse. Therefore, a strong human settlement center is urgently needed. As you have heard from our friends, the distinguished representative of the International Labour Organization, almost at the same time as Habitat, an ILO tripartite World Conference on Employment, Income Distribution, Social Progress, and the International Division of Labor is taking place in Geneva. One of the basic demands submitted by ICFTU is that governments should seek to promote, in connection with sensible investment policies, economic growth and the reduction of unemployment, including activities in the field of human settlement. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I wish you much success for this conference, and we are more confident than we were at the beginning. But I think we all should not forget that in this field it is rather 5 minutes past midnight than before. Thank you very much.
Je remercie le représentant de la Confédération internationale des syndicats libres. Conformément à la décision prise par la conférence à 6e séance plénière en application de l'article 55 du règlement intérieur, je donne maintenant la parole au représentant de l'Organisation de l'Unité syndicale africaine, M. Etienne Ohora.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates and observers, I'm honored to have this opportunity of addressing this august assembly on behalf of Comrade Denis Akumu, the Secretary General of the Organization of African Trade Union Unity, OATUU. Our organization is the only continental trade union organization in Africa which represents all the workers of Africa, including the peasants. African workers and peasants, therefore, view this conference as one of the most important and a historic gathering of our time. Mr. President, we have been told in this conference that both developed and developing countries face human settlement problems. Some speakers even went as far as generalizing these problems as if identical problems of human settlement exist between the rich and the poor nations of the third world. It is unbelievable, Mr. President, in our view, for one to expect us to buy such ideas when it is a well-known fact that the developed nations are responsible for the environment, for the environmental problems because of their waste of world resources, whereas the third world are only a victim. How can we believe the prophecies of some people whose personal solutions to the problems is to find a summer home, a second family car, a second television set, whereas his counterpart in the third world is lacking the basic necessities of life, such as food, shelter, and clean water to quench his thirst? Mr. President, we strongly believe that there is something wrong with the approach put forward to tackle these problems in this conference. We also very strongly believe that human settlement cannot be affected worldwide with the present world structure and realities unless the developed nations respond favorably to the demands of the third world countries to make this planet of ours meaningful to all, not exclusively to a few whose long-planned and exploitation of the weaker nations made them and still continue to make them what they are so proud of. Mr. President, human settlement cannot therefore be discussed in isolation from the basic necessities of life. As I said earlier, food, health, education, and employment, which are linked in the overall socio-economic development of countries and as such to the international economic order. Human settlement should therefore be seen as an instrument and object of development, but not as an end to curb social problems in the congested cities of developed nations. In attaining this goal, emphasis should therefore be made distinctively on the peculiarities of the problems of the developed and developed nations, so that priority is given to the needs of the most disadvantaged people. The Organization of African Trade Union Unity therefore urges this conference to adopt concrete measures for national and international action that can improve the future prospects in this domain. In this juncture, Mr. President, the Declaration of Principles of the Non-Aligned Nations can very fittingly serve this purpose, and I quote, "Every state must have the sovereign and inalienable right to choose its economic system as well as its political, social, and cultural system in accordance with the will of its people without interference, coercion, or external threat of any kind. Every state must have the right to exercise full and permanent sovereignty over its wealth, natural resources, economic activities, adopting the necessary measures for the planning, management of its resources, providing for the protection, preservation, and enhancement of the environment." Land being the fundamental element in human settlement, Mr. President, every state must have the right to take the necessary steps to maintain under public control the use, possession, disposal, and reservation of land. Every state must have the right to plan and regulate use of land, which is one of its most important resources, in such a way that the growth of population centers, both urban and rural, are based on a comprehensive land use plan. Such measures must assure the attainment of basic goals of social and economic reform for every country, in conformity with its national and land tenure system and legislation. The waste and misuse of resources in war and armaments must be prevented. All countries must make a firm commitment to promote general and complete disarmament and effective international control. Beginning with nuclear disarmament, the resources released in that way must be utilized so as to achieve a better quality of life for the people of the developing countries. All persons have the right, or must have the right, Mr. President, I'm sorry, I know this may not be in conformity with the procedure, but I'm here delivering a speech on behalf of the entire African continent, and I believe this World Forum can afford to give me 1 minute extra. I will, however, try to finish as soon as possible. All persons must have the right and the duty to participate individually and collectively in the elaboration and implementation of policies and programs of the human settlements. Adequate shelter and services are a basic human right which places an obligation on governments to ensure the attainment by all the people, beginning with the direct assistance to the least advanced through guided programs of self-help and community action. Government should endeavor to remove all impediments hindering attainment of these goals. Of special importance is the elimination of social and racial segregation inter alia through the creation of better balanced communities which blend different social groups, occupation, housing, and amenities. The international community must exercise its responsibility to control national efforts to meet the human settlements and challenges facing them. Since resources of governments are inadequate to meet all needs, the international community should provide the necessary financial and technical assistance, evolve appropriate institutional arrangements, and seek new effective ways to promote them. In the meantime, assistance to developing countries must at least reach the percentage targets set in the International Development Strategy for the second United Nations Development Decade. In conclusion, Mr. President, we would be failing in our responsibilities if we do not strongly condemn the illegal Zionist settlements established in the occupied Arab territories in Palestine and the mass expulsion from their homeland still being experienced until this moment by the Palestinian people. The Organization of African Trade Union Unity, Mr. President, condemns in the strongest terms the South African apartheid regime, the Ian Smith racist regime in Rhodesia, and the multinationals operating in Southern Africa, with the backing, of course, and full support of some developed nations. The OATUU urges the Group of 77 to insist that their draft declaration of principles must be approved by the Habitat Conference. Failure to do so, Mr. President, OATUU very strongly suggests that the Group of 77 do the following. One, collectively abrogate all debts they owe the developed nations. Two, take over the multinational corporations operating in their countries who are known to be the polluters of the world's environment. Three, drastically begin to reduce foreign trade with developed nations. Four, increase trade amongst themselves. Five, adapt the Boston Tea Party attitude, which is dump rather than sell cheaper. And lastly, ruthlessly begin to industrialize nationally, regionally, and internationally amongst the third world countries. To enable the third world countries, Mr. President, to be self-reliant. In other words, implement the Harambee spirit as being advocated and implemented by the Kenyans through the President of Kenya, President Jomo Kenyatta. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Organisation de l'Unité syndicale africaine. Je donne la parole au représentant de la Congrès mondial musulman, M. Abdul Patel.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we bring to you greetings of peace and harmony from World Muslim Congress, Muslim World League, and the Council of Muslims Community of Canada. As Canadian affiliates of World Muslim Congress, we are honored to be here to welcome you and to be welcomed by you. The basic object of this conference is to deliberate upon ways and means to uplift the condition of human beings and to utilize the resources in the best possible way for the benefit of the humanity. Mr. President, as believers in Islam, we are assured and optimistic that it is possible to develop priorities and politics which should enable the individual to select lifestyle which put him in harmony with nature, with fellow man, and with himself. We agree that the development of biologically adequate, physically acceptable, and socially just environment for human settlement is the need of the hour. But mere affirmation of this principle will not bring any relief to the exploited and underprivileged people of the world unless we commit ourselves to affirmative actions as well. Mr. President, brothers and sisters, action is the need of the hour, as belief without actions are dangerous. They bring false hopes and deeper anguish to the suffering multitudes, and they give a false sense of complacency and satisfaction to those who have means of making positive change possible. We Muslims are seekers of truth and harmony, which are attainable only if we honor, glorify, and obey the will of Almighty Allah, God. The eternal God endow man with the necessary talents and abilities which he needs to understand and master the resource of time, energy, and space for the benefits of all creatures, living and unborn. From the belief in the oneness of God follows the essential unity of creation and the sacred brotherhood in man, irrespective of race, caste, color, linguistic difference, economic station, or political affiliations. And because, Mr. President, God Almighty is only sovereign master and owner of all things, man is just a custodian, a caretaker, a trustee, answerable and accountable for his actions and omissions. Thus we reject solemnly and vehemently any pseudo solution based on racism, moralistic exploitation, socio-economic serfdom, or technological blackmail. God also warns us that the environments of people cannot be changed until there is a prior internal change in the people themselves. Thus, as Muslims, we believe that only solutions for the many ills which confers today are the ones based on equity, prudence, responsible concern, international cooperation, self-help, and a greater use of balance of man through faith in God and submission to the will of God. The problem, as the name of this conference indicates, we are assembled here to investigate the challenges of developing stimulating environments for human settlement. The key word is human. Thus, the focus of our discussions and planning must be on finding ways and means of promoting implementing to human progress. Poverty, rising populations are some of the major factors responsible for the contemporary predicament of human settlement. We cannot ignore the disparity which exists between the poor and the rich countries when 75% of the world resources are consumed by 25% of its people. Mr. President, home The most immediate and profound influence on a human being is his home. Home is the immediate environment. Here we learn or do not learn love, security, and how to tune with other human beings. Slums breed crime and deprive the family of the very foundation of security and self-respect. Detentions. It is of paramount importance for developing countries to stop the migration from rural to urban areas. The way to do this is by bringing the city to the village, by providing city amenities and attraction, plus jobs in the rural areas. Similarly, cities can be improved by building neighborhoods based on a village model. Developing countries man has to learn to see the settlement crisis as a still issue of human survival in next decades. Because of lack of time, Mr. President, I'll conclude my thing in a nutshell. In conclusion, brothers and sisters in humanity, we submit that religion in its sense is the only effective source of moral obligations which inspire and regulate the conduct of individuals, community, and states. 2, man is the only trustee and so must use the natural resources in a socially responsible way for the benefit of all fellow men living and unborn. 3, housing and other elements of human settlement must be given priority in national planning scheme, and the planning must encourage people participation, self-help, use of local resources, and cultural traditions. 4, human settlement should be planned to facilitate human fulfillment through friendly interactions, mutual understanding, creative recreation, freedom of men and choice, and the right to worship. In the end, we would like to emphasize that efforts to tackle the gigantic problem facing us can only meet with success if we go along with the nature. Any effort running according to the nature is bound to end in failure. Postscripts, we endorse unconditionally the focus on the provision of pure water and on the search for alternative sources of energy other than nuclear power, as recommended by the Vancouver Habitat Forum. Thank you.
Et je remercie le représentant du Congrès mondial des musulmans et je donne la parole au secrétaire de notre conférence.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Les annonces que j'ai pour cette fin du matinée sont les suivants. Les chefs des délégations du groupe latino-américain, ils vont avoir une réunion à 6 heures cet après-midi à l'hôtel Bayshore Inn. Les pays de l'Europe de l'Est, ils vont avoir une réunion de leur groupe au Beck Building, au 7e étage, room 703. Enfin, si nous allons terminer, comme on avait prévu, le débat général ce soir, demain matin, la plénière ne va pas se réunir jusqu'à l'après-midi. Alors, le pays hôte va présenter dans cette salle un film titré Sense of Place. Ce film traite des problèmes globaux de l'établissement humain et ça dure à peu près 1 heure. La première version de 10h à 11h, ça sera en français, version française. La deuxième version de 11h à midi, ça sera en version anglaise, et de 11h à 1h, ça sera en version espagnole. Tous les délégués sont invités de venir voir la projection de ce film. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Je remercie Monsieur le secrétaire et maintenant je ferme notre conférence.